Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, a major win for separation of powers in North Carolina as a 32-year court battle known as Leandro is officially dead as an order is out from the state's highest court. We'll get into all the details coming up. And a good Friday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget that you can take the show with you 24/7 on demand in your favorite podcast app. It's real simple. Just search for the Nick Craig Show, tap the subscribe button, and you'll get a new program delivered each and every weekday morning. Our program today is brought to you by our good friend Melissa Gott over at the Law Group in Wilmington. You can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com or give them a call 910-251-6088. We'll hear more from them as we roll through what is going to be a very busy Friday edition right here on the Nick Craig Show. A major decision out from the North Carolina Supreme Court yesterday ends a 32-year, yes, I did not misspeak or misread that, a 32-year-long legal battle over public education funding. For those that don't follow North Carolina politics all that closely, or maybe it's more accurate to say those that do not follow public education closely across the state, you may have not heard of Leandro. However, if you are somebody that does keep tuned to what is going on as it relates to public education, you are very familiar with Leandro because, frankly, you've got a bunch of uninformed individuals puppeting and running around the state of North Carolina, yelling and screaming, Leandro this, Leandro that, we need Leandro, 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 Leandro. All of them not understanding what the case was when it was originally filed back in 1993 and using it as some sort of political win or an attempt at a political win lobbied at the North Carolina legislature. So let's get into some of the details. A lot of reaction also flowing in across North Carolina as well as the Supreme Court ruled 4-3 yesterday, ending the 32-year-old Leandro school funding case. That decision by the state's highest court throws out a lower court ruling that would have required the North Carolina General Assembly to spend an extra $677 million on education spending in the state that could have led to billions of dollars more in years to come. Now, let me start off by saying this, because there's obviously the legal side of this, which is rather interesting, and we'll get into some of the details on that, at least to the best of my ability, as I am not an attorney. But there is a large, I would even argue, a larger political side of this debate. So let's get into some of the backstory here. If you follow public education across North Carolina, for the last 10 years, or 15 years probably more accurately, Democrats across the state of North Carolina have been yelling and screaming about Leandro. They have been claiming that the Republican-led General Assembly is starving the public education system in North Carolina. Those are some of the things that have been said, that the Republican-led legislature is not providing adequate funding for public education. Now, of course, this completely ignores the fact that over the last 15 years, public school spending out of the North Carolina General Assembly has skyrocketed. And this is something that is not up for debate. This is something that is not up for discussion at all, because the numbers very clearly back it up. Here is a chart looking at education funding from the 2007-2008 budget all the way through the end of 2024. And you can clearly tell by looking at this chart, which I'll have in the show notes over at patreon.com/Nick Craig, that funding for public education in the state of North Carolina from the General Assembly, this does not include local supplements from county commissioners or federal dollars. No, this is state spending, has increased from $7.65 billion in 2009-2010, where Democrats had controlled the state for over 100 years, to more than $12.3 billion in the 23-24 school year. And why is this relevant? Because you will hear Democrats, and you hear this all across the state. If you listen into any school board meeting practically across North Carolina, you will see Democrat after Democrat after Democrat coming to the podium during the call to audience when they take feedback or listen to the public's concern of the day that Republicans are not funding public education. Republicans are starving public education. Republicans are destroying public education. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not based in any sort of fact or reality. We have seen funding go from more than $7.5 billion to over $12 billion since Republicans have had control of the legislature. So there is nothing here. This is a fallacy. This is a quote unquote winning message for Democrats to run around the state of North Carolina with that is not based in fact, is not based in reality. And so anytime you hear these claims, anytime you hear these assertions, this is the kind of information that you need to fire back. It's just not true. There's no other way to slice and dice this issue. Public school funding has increased significantly over the last 15 years. It has. The numbers are there. It's not up for debate. There's no got you in these numbers. No, this is the amount of money, which, by the way, education across the state, including K-12, the UNC system, the community college system, all of that combined makes up almost half, or in some cases, more than half of the state's yearly budget. The state's budget is somewhere in the ballpark, it's over $20 billion a year. More than half of that is public education in one way, shape, or form, whether we're talking about K-12, community colleges, or the UNC system, which, I don't know, was there like 12 UNC schools or something like that? All of that, the state spends half of the money that it takes in on education. Is there a discussion to be had over more funding for education? Sure, I'm willing to have the discussion. Is there ability to have this debate? Absolutely. I'm all for debate. I'm all for discussion. I'm all for intellectual conversations. What I am not for, and what I will not entertain, and what I do not entertain, is Democrats pointing the finger at the Republican legislature and claiming that they are destroying public schools, because it's just not based in any sort of fact or reality. They'll use the Opportunity Scholarship Program as an example of that, which, by the way, has given more access to more low-income families across the state of North Carolina to get out of failing public schools and provide their child with a sound basic education that, let's be perfectly honest, some public schools cannot provide across the state. So they'll use that. They'll claim that the Republicans are not accurately or properly funding public education, which is what the Leandro suit was. And I'm here to tell you emphatically, without a doubt, it is not based in reality. Democrats in 2009 and 2010 furloughed educators, furloughed state highway patrol members, racked up debt that they racked up bills that they could not pay, and drove this state's financial future into the complete and total ground. You want to talk about fact? You want to talk about reality? Democrats mismanaged the state budget as it relates to education and the state budget as a whole for decades. Tax and spend more than we're taking in, leverage billions of dollars worth of debt to the federal government, all so that they could claim that they were doing all of these great things. None of it came to fruition. They put the state of North Carolina in a serious financial hole, a serious financial issue. Thankfully, in 2010, middle of the Tea Party movement, Republicans gained control of the General Assembly in the 2010 midterms and were sworn in early 2011. And you saw individuals like Tom Tillis, Tim Moore, Senate Leader Phil Berger, and many, many others begin to dramatically change the state of North Carolina to course correct what had been decades of mismanagement and failure at the hands of Democrats. There is literally nobody else that you can point the finger at. Democrats controlled the General Assembly for over 100 years. And throughout the vast majority of that time, they had Democrats in the governor's mansion. There is no way that you can point this and blame the Republicans. We didn't have power. We were not only the minority, we were a major minority. And in some periods of time going through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was only a handful of Republicans in state government. So if you really want to bear down on this issue, you really want to talk about this stuff long term, Democrats should take a hard look in the mirror. But I'll contend to you, I suspect that is not something that they're willing to do. Back to the Leandro case and a little bit of backstory as to how we got here. More than 32 years ago, the Leandro case started with parents, students, and school districts at 5 low-wealth rural school districts suing the state of North Carolina for additional funding. 94 is when it was filed in 93, late 93, I think, and was kind of official and made its way forward in 1994. 1994, which, of course, I'll note, who controlled the General Assembly in 1994? Democrats. Who was in the governor's mansion in 1994? A Democrat. Nevertheless, the case, however, changed dramatically over the next 3 decades, including the addition of plaintiffs from 6 urban school districts. And so you have seen this case, which started with a very narrow scope. 5 low-wealth, more rural school districts suing the General Assembly, suing the state, essentially, and claiming that the state was not providing enough in education funding. And so this thing morphed and went all over the map and back and forth to the Supreme Court for 30 years. The first ruling in Leandro happened in 1997. That's how long ago we're talking about. 1997 is when that first ruling took place. And since that period of time, Democrats, again, who controlled the General Assembly, controlled the governor's mansion leading up to 2010, could have solved this problem at any point. And this is the irony of this whole situation, and something that you need to make sure that you have as ammunition in your back pocket when there's this conversation that takes place or anybody starts challenging you on this. And I think the question is pretty simple. If Leandro was such a big deal, if Leandro, it would have been the surefire solution to public education in North Carolina, why did Democrats not do anything about it for 16 years? Folks, that's the reality. It was filed in 93, official in 94, ran up all the way until late 2010, when, of course, Republicans won. That midterm election was in November. They didn't get sworn in until the next year in 2011. I think it's a fair question to ask. Why did Democrats who proclaim themselves to be the saviors of public education, who claim that they're the only ones that care about public education, those gosh darn Republicans, once again, stripping away public education from our students, why is it not a fair question to ask why this wasn't dealt with in the 16 years that Democrats had complete and exclusive authority and control in North Carolina? How is that not a fair question? It absolutely is. And it just highlights the amount of what I can only describe as misinformation surrounding Leandro. You have got these liberal progressive education activists that have been roaming their way around North Carolina over the last decade or so, puppeting Leandro this, Leandro that, claiming that all of our problems are solved if the Republicans will just fund Leandro. It just doesn't make any sense. I mentioned that in the first segment, but it doesn't make any sense. It's not based in any logic. It's not based in any fact. It is just a political talking point for those on the left. So over the last 30 years, there's been a variety of back and forths with this case up and down the various ladders of the North Carolina judicial system until the decision was made yesterday, a 4-3 decision by the North Carolina Supreme Court to end this case, which I will contend should have ended decades ago. Chief Justice Paul Newby wrote in the majority opinion, "In this case, we resolve whether the trial court lacked the subject matter jurisdiction to enter its order on the 17th of April, 2023. To do so, we must consider what happened to a case when the original claims have been transformed into claims very different than those in the pleadings. In other words, can a party completely change the subject matter of its actions without following the proper procedure for invoking the trial court's subject matter jurisdiction over a new, very different claim? Newby then went on to write, "We conclude the short answer is no. Rather, litigants are required to properly invoke the trial court's subject matter jurisdiction over claims that they want resolved. If litigants do not do so, then the trial court lacks subject matter jurisdiction to adjudicate those claims." Newby, as I just read, was heavily focused on an order that came out in July of 2017 and a court filing led by then Attorney General Josh Stein, who is now the Democrat governor of the state, in which the court at that time said that the state of North Carolina was compelled to spend more than $1.7 billion on public education. That is what the court ruled in 2017. And so one of the very concerning parts, in 2023, one of the very concerning parts of that process, one of the very concerning parts of that trial was the fact that the North Carolina court system claimed that they were going to spend money and compel the state to spend money without the oversight or the authority of the legislature. So let me explain exactly what was going on here. With this legal challenge, again, going all the way back to 1994, and some of the most recent rulings in this case over the last 10 years claimed that the courts claimed that the Treasury essentially had to write a check to schools without the General Assembly's oversight. And for those that understand how government works and understand separation of powers, that is a major problem because the purse strings are within the legislative branch. In this case, we would be talking about the North Carolina General Assembly. The courts do not have the authority, as it is laid out in our state constitution, to direct funds to go somewhere without legislative oversight and without legislative approval. You know, it's pretty ironic. We listen to Democrats while Trump's in office talking about destroying the Constitution, ignoring the Constitution, this, that, and the other, Constitution, this, Constitution, that. Our state's Constitution is abundantly clear. Spending, which is what we're talking about as it relates to public school funding, is the sole authority of the duly elected legislature. It is not for the courts to decide. It is not for the governor to decide. It is absolutely the sole authority of the legislature. But of course, because Republicans now control the legislature, Democrats have once again used their sue till blue strategy to try and compel the General Assembly to spend more money on public education using the judicial system, when really what they should be worried about is winning General Assembly elections, right? We see this at the national level and here at the state. Instead of winning in the court of the public opinion, instead of convincing voters that your ideas are better than those on the political right, if you're a Democrat, instead of winning that way, they use the courts to try and impose their will. They do this all the time at all levels of government because they cannot win elections. Their ideas suck. Their ideas are no good. The vast majority of people reject those ideas, so they have taken the sue till blue approach as it relates to things like public education funding, which is controlled by the legislature. Plain and simple, it's controlled by the legislature. I'll have some more comments on Leandro coming up here in just a couple of minutes, plus some very strong reaction from both sides of the political aisle as the Nick Craig Show continues. Before that, I want to tell you about the law group here in Wilmington and remind you that when legal challenges arise, make sure you put your trust in the law group. Since 2003, their experienced attorneys have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across eastern North Carolina. Whether you're facing a divorce, navigating a real estate transaction, or maybe you're in a position where you need a strong defense. If so, the Law Group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures your questions are answered and issues are resolved as quickly as possible. Great news, ladies and gentlemen. They're not some big national law group. Melissa got her team. They live right here in southeastern North Carolina, live here in Wilmington. Their office is also located in downtown Wilmington, just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. Give them a call, 910-251-6088, or online, lawgroupnc.com. It's the Law Group, experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate the Law Group and their continued support of the Nick Craig Show. All right, we'll grab a quick break and we'll talk more about this major loss for Democrats across the state of North Carolina. As the Leandro ruling is here, Leandro is officially dead. We'll get into those details as the Nick Craig Show continues, streaming live this morning, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. Good Friday to you, and welcome back to the Nick Craig Show. Actually, it is a Good Friday here as we lead into the Easter weekend. We are continuing the discussion today on a major decision out from the North Carolina Supreme Court, obviously the state's highest court, on Thursday, which ruled that a 32-year court battle known as Leandro, dealing with public education funding, is officially done and over. It was dismissed with prejudice, meaning that the individuals who filed this case originally do not have the ability to refile. Does not necessarily mean that there will not be more legal challenges over public education funding in North Carolina, but in terms of Leandro and the 30-plus years that it has gone on, that case is said and done. There is no way to appeal it. It was already at the state's highest court. It had been there multiple times, I'll note. And the fact that it was dismissed with prejudice means that those same individuals cannot file the same suit once again. And so, again, there's two different sides of this. There's the legal side of this, and then there's the public policy side of this. And those are two dramatically different things. as I was mentioning there before the break, in 2022, the state Supreme Court decided that it was going to require that the state of North Carolina write checks by the state executives, not the legislature. And that is what has gotten this case into the situation that it is right now. Because again, as we know, if you understand the state's constitution, which it is pretty clear and plain as it is laid out, as it relates to funding, that has to be done by the legislature, right? Democrats are currently arguing and battling about this in Washington, D.C., right? They don't want Donald Trump to be able to do anything as it relates to spending. Yet here in North Carolina, they say, sure, courts, you should absolutely be able to compel the executive branch to write checks or to direct funding, which is just not how our state's constitution is written. And so this, to me, boils down to a larger issue. And this is something that is fundamentally different between the left and the right. Democrats are under the impression, and it's absolutely not the case, but they are under the impression that more money solves this problem. And that is just the quintessential fundamental difference between the left and the right. Are there issues with public schools in North Carolina? Absolutely. Every year the state has a report card that is released that shows schools that are failing, that are underperforming, that have issues. No question about it. It is a very real thing. The question is how you resolve that issue. Democrats are of the mindset, and we see this in other states. We saw this in North Carolina for 100 years prior to the Republicans taking control of the legislature in 2011, that you just shovel more money at the problem and it will go away. And that is just fundamentally different from the way in which conservatives and Republicans operate. We don't believe that. Because we have seen time and time again, the more money you shovel at a problem, in most cases, it just exacerbates it. It does not solve it. It does not make it better. It does not provide relief to the issue that you are trying to solve. Democrats' whole philosophy is more and more money. That's why their tax and spend policies are so disastrous. And that is why blue states like New York and California and Washington and Illinois, all of these blue states are failing because their gut reaction to literally anything that is a problem is, well, let's just raise taxes and spend more money on it. When that is just not the case. As I noted, North Carolina has dramatically increased its overall education funding and spending over the last decade. The numbers back that up. It's not up for debate. It's not up for discussion. It's not up for conversation. Yet we are continuing to see many failing schools and school districts across the state of North Carolina. Why is that the case? Because it's a bureaucracy problem. It's lack of accountability. It's a bad curriculum. It's a variety of different factors that lead to these issues in public education. And I'm sorry, but shoveling more and more money into that doesn't solve the problem. Because as I noted, we have seen education funding in the state go from $7.65 billion in 2010 to more than $12.35 billion in 23-24. That is a significant increase. Yet, if you listen and believe the line that you were being fed by Democrats, everything is now not only worse, but it's way worse than it's ever been. How can that be the case if more and more and more and more money continues to get spent? Right? See, there's a huge disconnect in the argument that is made by those on the political left, those on the progressive left. And so we've seen these liberal special interest groups and these liberal Democrat judges use Leandro to try and demand billions of dollars. And when it's all said and done, $4, $5, $6, $7 billion in additional spending without any accountability or any reforms. And so if you're not willing to look at the entirety of the equation, which I am, Democrats are not, I can at the same time think, yeah, we might need some more money for public education, but we also need to look at accountability. We also need to look at the bureaucracy within many of these school districts and try and figure out, how do we actually raise test scores? How do we actually get children back to being proficient in reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? You have to be able to look at the entirety of the equation. Democrats don't want to do that, right? And that should be no surprise to you because accountability is a foreign word to them. It's something that they're not familiar with. It's something that they're not willing to take to task. And so the solution is take a big old shovel and just keep dumping money into the public education system, crossing your fingers that it just magically solves the problem. I mean, essentially, yesterday's ruling stops what I would probably describe as a writing a blank check approach to North Carolina's public education system, which is the way that it should be. Because public education is not the only solution. Should we improve our public schools? Yes, absolutely. Should we also, at the same time, give families a choice through something like the Opportunity Scholarship Program? Absolutely. And we have done that. Democrats hate the Opportunity Scholarship Program. And I think this rolls back to a larger discussion of how the public school system has become an indoctrination camp for those on the political left. Right? This is the dirty little secret that they don't want to tell you. It's a dirty little secret that they don't mention. Why is it that they believe that only public school is the option for your child to get an education? So that they can jack up these classrooms with a bunch of left-wing progressive educators and left-wing progressive school administrative staff to use it as an indoctrination tool. And we've fortunately seen the North Carolina General Assembly take that to task as well, with things like the Parents' Bill of Rights, in which parents now have, as they always should have, but have the ability to see what's going on in their kids' classroom, to see what kind of material they're learning. This goes back to COVID, early parts or middle parts of 2020, when students, young kids, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, were sitting at home on Zoom calls learning, which was another great idea by the Democrats because they wanted to, of course, keep your schools closed. That's what Roy Cooper and the Democrats pushed for here in North Carolina. And parents, for the first time, really got a true look as to what was going on in their kid's classroom, right? Because while their kid was sitting at the kitchen table on a Zoom call, mom or dad's in the next room working from home and is, able to hear what's being discussed. Parents were mortified with what they were hearing. They were thinking, I'm sorry, you're talking to my 4th grader about this? And so what did you see in the immediate response, in the immediate aftermath of that? You saw school board meetings starting to be attended by conservatives, by individuals who did not want their children indoctrinated but wanted their kids to learn how to read, learn how to write, and learn how to do math. And fortunately, because we have strong conservative leadership in our legislature here in North Carolina, they were able to move forward with the Parents' Bill of Rights and give parents the opportunity to see what's going on in their classroom, which Democrats hate because then they can no longer use it as an effective indoctrination tool. That's why they hate homeschooling. That's why they hate charter and private schools as well, because they can no longer use their indoctrination tool, which is the public education system. And they absolutely despise and hate that. So as we continue this discussion on Leandro, there's a whole bunch of major wins here. It's absolutely a separation of powers, major separation of powers win across North Carolina because, as I've noted, the state constitution gives the legislature the sole authority of the power of the purse. Not the executive branch, not the legislative branch, not the executive branch, not the judicial branch, but the legislative branch. Because Leandro, under the way in which Democrats have been playing this out, essentially turned judges into super legislators, practically, in which they can order hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars in new spending, which is just not the process, not the way that plays out when you've got a state constitution that very clearly lays out how something like this should happen. So we're getting a pretty strong reaction here in North Carolina from a variety of different individuals. We'll start off with a Senate leader, Phil Berger, who released a pretty fiery statement on Thursday evening saying, quote, "For decades, liberal education special interests have improperly tried to hijack North Carolina's constitutional funding process in order to impose their policy preferences via judicial fiat. Today's decision confirms that the proper pathway for policymaking is the legislative process. Today, North Carolina's children have access to world-class educational opportunities because of the legislature's commitment to improving educational outcomes. As we prepare for the short session, Senate Republicans will continue our ongoing focus in increasing parental involvement and educational opportunities for all students. House Speaker Destin Hall's office also highlighted the decision, saying, quote, "Today's decision rightly recognizes the constitutional role of the North Carolina General Assembly. Since the state constitution entrusts sole appropriation, aka money authority, to the legislature, House Republicans remain committed to investing in public education, including through our budget proposal to raise starting teacher pay to $50,000 and provide 8.7% average raises to our public school teachers." So that's the Republican reaction from two members, obviously two high-ranking members in the legislature, the leader of the House in Destin Hall, the leader of the Senate in Phil Berger, and as you can imagine, the Democrats have a very, very different reaction. Here's Josh Stein's statement on it, saying, quote, "Education opens doors of opportunity for our children, but today the court slammed them in the face of the students who deserve the right to a sound, basic public education. The Supreme Court simply ignored its own established precedent, enabling the General Assembly to continue to deprive another generation of North Carolina students of education promised by our Constitution." Folks, this is what I was talking about earlier in the show. This is the claim that Democrats continue to puppet and run around the state with, that the General Assembly is depriving an entire generation of public education. The state is spending $12 billion a year on education. It is half of our state's budget. You have to be verifiably nuts to twist yourself into the mental pretzel that with $12 billion in spending, that does not include, by the way, any local appropriations, which add up to hundreds of millions of dollars across North Carolina, that is not enough for education funding. But yet, this is what we see from Democrats. He continues in his statement. This is Democrat Governor Josh Stein. "In recent years, the General Assembly has dropped North Carolina to the 49th in the country in per pupil investments and made our teachers among the worst paid in the nation. 4 Supreme Court justices believe that is okay, but they are wrong. Their decision is contrary to the plain language of our Constitution and the court's past rulings." And so the Democrats have also used our state constitution, in which it says and claims that the state needs to provide a sound basic education. They have taken that and turned it into, well, then that means that we need to spend unlimited money on public education, right? That is the justification that they are using for Leandro. That's what the whole case revolves around. That the state constitution says you have to provide an education. Their claim is that over $12 billion is not enough. Now, of course, when you ask them, and you can try this on for size, ask next time you hear a Democrat or you're in a conversation with a Democrat over public education funding, and they say, hey, you need to spend, we need to spend more money on public education. Ask them one simple question. How much more? I've done this before, and I have never gotten an answer because there isn't an answer. It's just a cheap political talking point. Say, okay, fine, sure. I agree with you. We do need to spend more money. How much more? Do we need to spend another $5 billion? 10, 20, 30, 50? I mean, why don't we just delete everything else from state government and spend 100% of our state budget on education? Well, we can appropriate $25, $27 billion a year, and we'll do it all to the education system. How about that? They'll never be able to give you an answer because they don't have one. They don't have one at all. Here is Democrat Justice Anita Earls, who, by the way, is up for re-election this year. We've got to make sure we get Sarah Stevens elected to the North Carolina Supreme Court. She wrote this, quote, "The majority's decision to absolve the state of its own solemn obligation to provide opportunities for a sound basic education in a uniform system of public education, and arguably when a remedy is needed the most, is one of the most adversary to our school children who will have to face bravely. It is with those school children in mind and with enduring hope that an independent and impartial judiciary will one day again fulfill its own obligations to protect the constitutional educational rights of all school children and check the state when it fails to do the same. I dissent. This is the most politically charged thing that you can imagine from a member who, by the way, is claiming that she wants, her words, not mine, an independent and impartial judiciary. Anita Earls is the farthest thing from impartial and independent as it gets. She is a flaming, raging, out of control liberal. Fortunately, she's in the minority on the state Supreme Court, and hopefully conservative and Republican voters over the course of this year will get out and elect Representative Sarah Stevens, who is running to unseat Earls on the North Carolina Supreme Court. Because her argument, her claim that we need an independent judiciary is so typical for Democrats. It's always what they go to. Whenever they're losing an issue, whenever they're losing a battle, whenever they're losing an issue, it's always the same thing. Oh, we need an impartial group. We need an impartial this. We need an independent that. Meanwhile, when they're in control, no, those words will never leave their mouth. They don't want anything to be impartial or anything to be independent. It's only when Republicans are making decisions that Democrats are so concerned about impartial and unbiased groups. Give me a break. The long and the short of this story is one that is very simple. Democrats cannot win at the ballot box as it relates to the General Assembly. They cannot get enough individuals in the North Carolina legislature to change state education policy, so they've decided to use the court system, and fortunately, the state Supreme Court, in a 4-3 decision, has slapped them down, dismissed the case with prejudice, and it is done. It is over. If Democrats care so much about public education in North Carolina and think that they have the best ideas, then make those claims and get people out in November to support Democrats for the legislature. If this is your winning issue, if this is what you're going to win on, then convince the people of North Carolina that you have the best ideas. That's it. This is solely a legislative process. This is solely something that needs to be dealt with by the legislature. And it is so incredibly frustrating to watch those on the political left that lose election after election after election, thinking that they have the ability, that they have the authority, that they have the will to change how our state legislature operates and governs. The reality is you guys are in the minority. Your ideas are no good, and the people of North Carolina have rejected them. Plain and simple. This is a major, major win for separation of powers. This is a major, major win on this notion that money solves every single problem. And more than anything else, I would argue, this protects taxpayers from what I can only describe as essentially an endless mandate by these liberal judges and justices that have ruled on this case over the last 32 years. If you think there's an issue with public education, fine. I'm all willing for the discussion. I'm ready to have it. I'm actually open to the discussion. But don't sit here and tell me that you're going to mandate education spending from the judiciary. That's sure as hell not going to happen. If you want to change education funding, if you want to change education spending, it's very easy to do so. Win a majority in the North Carolina legislature and direct more money for schools. But that's the way that you need to go about it. That's how our Constitution is laid out, and that's how the process should and is laid out, thanks to this very, very smart decision from the North Carolina Supreme Court, finally ending this 32-year bloated case known as Leandro. And for Democrats that have been yelling and screaming about Leandro for the last decade, I don't know what the hell they're doing this morning, because it is the only thing they talk about. I watch every single meeting of the New Hanover County Board of Education. They had a meeting earlier this week, and there was public comment after public comment about Leandro, about school funding, blah, 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 blah. It's over. You guys lost once again. And again, quick thing to remember on this entire case. For the first 16 years of Leandro, Democrats controlled the legislature. Democrats controlled education funding, and they refused to fund Leandro. Make sure you remember that point. Make sure you take that point and shove it in the face of Democrats when they try and jump down your throat over Republican spending on education. 16 years they could have solved this case, and they didn't do a damn thing about it because it's a talking point. They don't really care. It's a talking point. So major victory here in North Carolina. I'm glad that at least in the long term, we will not have to hear about Leandro this and Leandro that anymore. I'm sure there will be a lot of commentary on it over the next couple of weeks and potentially months as the General Assembly gets back to session. But the case is done. It's not happening. The court system cannot and should not be able to mandate spending out of the state's coffers without the express oversight and the express approval and the express authority of the legislature. Plain and simple. So that's it. Major win, and I'm very much looking forward to not have to hear about Leandro anymore. So that is the latest. That's what we are tracking, and we'll keep you up to date with more reaction as there is likely to be more right here on the Nick Craig Show. Well, that is going to do it for a Friday edition. I hope that you have a fantastic Easter weekend. Enjoy some time with friends and family. We'll be back here Monday morning. Also, thank the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support. Visit them online, lawgroupnc.com, or give them a call, 910-251-6088. The Nick Craig Show streams live weekday mornings, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and is available 24/7 in your favorite podcast app. Have a phenomenal Easter weekend. We'll be back with you Monday morning right here on The Nick Craig Show.